Information fueled, opinion driven. This is the Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7. WTN.
All right, here we are. Here we go. Matt Murphy Show 106. Thank you for being around. Super Talk 99.7 WTN. So it's my apology to you that I misspoke when I said that we would have the Attorney General of the state of Tennessee on the show at 2:05 because I believe that there was an Eastern Time, Central Time gap there because we've got him right now on the Murphy Show hotline. The Attorney General of the great state of Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti, joins us on the program to talk about oral arguments happening yesterday before the United States Supreme Court. Mr. AG, good to talk with you. I hope you're well, sir.
Great to talk with you, Matt. Sorry for any confusion, but it's great to be on your show.
Well, it's great to have you here in Middle Tennessee, and I know you've been making the rounds, talking to as many people as possible, helping them understand what the purpose of these laws were that were duly passed by the General Assembly and signed by the governor, and what we hope to accomplish in terms of the rights of our youngsters and the rights of parents. Just walk us through, for those maybe not paying as much attention, what the basic argument for the state of Tennessee was before the United States Supreme Court.
So we won in the Court of Appeals, so it was the other side, the government and the ACLU, that brought the challenge to the Supreme Court. And their argument is that our law is discriminating on the basis of sex and that transgender status should be a special protected class under the Constitution. Our argument is there's no sex discrimination here. Because you have to provide different medicines to boys and girls to treat the same conditions. So if you give a boy testosterone, that's helping to solve problems if his body doesn't make enough testosterone. If you give a girl testosterone for a psychological condition, it's creating a host of medical complications. That's the heart of our sex discrimination argument. And then on the transgender status issue, the court hasn't recognized a new protected class in decades, and the criteria that the Supreme Court set out for what constitutes a protected class just doesn't really fit there. The point that came up probably most prominently in the argument was, is it immutable, which means it's not changing? And obviously, with the transgender term being an umbrella term for all sorts of different things, you have gender fluid, for instance, which is somebody whose gender changes. Well, if it changes, it's necessarily not immutable. And we feel pretty strongly that we've got a really solid argument on that issue as well.
Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti joining us for a few moments, talking about the oral arguments yesterday. It may be pretty basic in terms of the question, but I'm very curious your feeling leaving the court. I know that that's a dangerous task to feel like you have a sense of where the justices are, but do you feel like they received your argument well, AG?
Yeah. I don't want to get caught up in the horse race because they have months to go, and who knows what conversations they have or, what internal debates there are in the court. But I thought we put on a great case. I thought my Solicitor General, Matt Rice, did a phenomenal job arguing our side. The justices were twice as long as it was supposed to. They really worked through the issues. They're thinking about it hard. I feel like we have done everything we can on behalf of Tennessee to put the best possible argument out there to the court.
Well, and I know that it's not the main thrust of the argument presented to you by the other side, but you did score, I thought, in listening to the testimony of victory yesterday, as the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, they were forced to agree with the position that there is not an increase in suicide rates based on people who do not receive these procedures. It seems to me, Attorney General, that one of the few justifications that I hear from the other side on this issue as to why you need to do this at such a young age, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age, is that the suicide rate goes up precipitously if you do not. And you pushed the issue, or your argument, your team pushed the issue and was able to disabuse the other side of this notion, correct?
Yeah, I thought that was the most important part of the argument, was the ACLU lawyer acknowledging for Justice Alito that the suicide rate is not affected. Because over and over you hear, well, you can either have a dead daughter or a live son, and parents were bullied into going along with these procedures with the threat of suicide. And it's really important for people to know the truth here, because the long-term effects of subjecting kids to these treatments are horrifying. And the evidence, the systematic reviews of the evidence show little to no benefit to the kids. So you're talking about a huge risk, low benefit, and parents were bullied with these threats of suicide that just didn't hold any water.
And just to help people that perhaps have not been following this is specifically tailored for minors in the state of Tennessee, right? This has nothing to do with people who have reached the age of majority. You know, if the General Assembly wants to take up something along those lines at some future time, fine, but this has to do with underage children.
Right. I mean, all of the debate about it focused on kids not being able to consent to such lifelong consequences, on the lack of research related to kids. I mean, this is a kid-oriented law, and, you know, there's a lot of talk on the other side about how this means a universal ban. Well, that's not what this law is. That's not what the Tennessee General Assembly was looking at.
I know that many of your fellow AGs were watching and studying this case and studying the oral arguments carefully. We spoke to Attorney General of the state of Alabama, Steve Marshall, yesterday in the aftermath of the oral argument. I mean, the idea being that if the courts rule in our favor, well, I'll just ask it open-ended, AG, what does a favorable ruling mean for not just Tennessee, but for the United States, particularly for our minor children?
So there are a few different ways we can win, but the big win would be the court saying there's no heightened scrutiny. This is not sex discrimination. The states can legislate with respect to transgender status or gender identity without the courts coming in and second-guessing via constitutional argument what they have done. And that would leave it up to democracy. That lets the people's elected representatives make the choices about what our laws are. This is America. That's how we want things to come out. So that would be the big win. And I want to briefly say Steve Marshall has been a hero on this topic. His amicus brief in this case was huge. He has done a lot of work on this. He was up here at the argument sitting right behind me, and I'm proud to call him my friend. I'm really glad he had a chance to get on.
No, absolutely. And I consider him a friend as well, given my time back in the state of Alabama. I think he's done a great job as AG of Alabama, as you've done a great job for us. And so the time frame is, you know, I mean, obviously it's going to be months before we get a determination by the court.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be shocked if we got something before, you know, June or July.
Well done by you. I mean, what is your message when you speak to more aggressive, and I know you've got to go, but when you speak to more aggressive organizations, and I know you've been available to a lot of different media organizations, and they suggest that there's going to be harm done to kids as a result of this legislation, this law, what is your message to those individuals that perhaps think differently than the majority of us in Tennessee with regard to this issue?
Yeah, I mean, the message is look at the evidence. You know, look at what happened in Europe. England, Sweden, Norway, Finland, these are not conservative countries. These are not red states. They're countries that dove into this stuff early on, made it widely available to kids. Then they looked at the research. They realized that the risks way outweigh the benefits, and they started seriously restricting the availability of these procedures for kids. So the folks who try to write it off as, oh, this is a crazy Christian nationalist thing, that just doesn't square with the facts. The research points in the direction of keeping kids away from this. Other countries that have looked at the research have done the same thing. To the extent that this is a political issue, it's politicized by activists who are suppressing the research and who are trying to force everybody into a fake consensus to get their way.
A perfect man and a perfect team for the job before the United States Supreme Court. We appreciate you spending some time with us today, Jonathan. Thank you so much for representing the state of Tennessee in the manner that you do, and we look forward to the next conversation. We look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Matt. It's an honor to do it.
Absolutely. There's Jonathan Skrmetti, AG of the state of Tennessee. Great job by him. Great job by his team and everyone involved in this case. I mean, obviously, the arguments that were made, I mean, the political left and many within the medical community and the psychiatric community attempted to bludgeon us over the head with regard to suicide ideation or suicide rates, and the idea, the justification that we hear over and over again like Jonathan put it, and I think he put it very well, you can have a dead girl or a live boy. That's your choice. And that's the manner in which the medical community that makes a tremendous amount of money on this, that's the manner in which they put it to parents. Look, I understand that there are some parents that demonstrate that they have their own sets of issues. Sadly, I think a lot of the parents involved in these situations get misrepresented. And here's what I mean by that. The most vocal, the most vociferous advocates for these procedures are oftentimes the ones that we look at and recognize that maybe they have something going on in their lives that has spilled over to their children. That's not the majority of parents who are going through this. The majority of parents want to do right by their children, and they recognize that they have a mental and or physical issue at some point as their children begin to get older. They don't know how to deal with that, and they look for help. And many of the parents that look for help look to people with degrees on their walls, with doctor in front of their names, whether they're psychiatric in nature or more medical. And they sit down with those folks. And sadly, it has become a cottage industry in this United States of America, as it has in other countries around the globe, that they lead you to one and only one conclusion, and that is affirmation. That if your daughter tells you that she wants to be a duck, then by God, she's a duck and you should quack. Well, the reasoning behind this affirmation-only approach rests solely in the idea that if you don't do this, they're going to kill themselves. That's the argument. That if you don't affirm that your 8-year-old boy is actually an 8-year-old girl and begin dressing them in dresses and begin growing their hair long and offering them makeup and giving them ear, whatever your version of feminization might be, and then taking the additional step and approach to offering them puberty blockers or hormone therapies or whatever it might be, and eventually getting to the point where you have literal medical procedures on them to alter their bodies. Parents are told, sadly, they believe that their children will kill themselves. There is no reputable research study that has been done to indicate that this is the case. And as a matter of fact, the individual who was making the argument for the ACLU, Chase Strangio, I don't know, man. I think he's born female, presents as male now. I think that's right. Strangio argued that there was more conclusive evidence in longer-term study that the procedures lead to an overall reduction in suicide rates, meaning that not just suicide attempts, but also suicide thinking or thinking about attempting suicide, saying that becomes a positive outcome. So after Judge Alito, and if you missed it, it was a brilliant moment, where Judge Alito said, hold on a second, page 195 of this case study, a British review of transgender medical studies. Justice Samuel Alito brings this up. It's called the Cass Report. Where he said on 195 of this report, it says there's no evidence that gender affirmative treatment reduced suicide. Strangio said, well, I get it. Quote, what I think that's referring to is there's no evidence in the studies that this treatment reduces contemplated suicide. He admitted the point. Then he tried to correct himself and said, well, there are other studies. And what these other studies do, because I've looked into this, they don't deal with suicide rates. Actually, the indicator is that individuals who go through this hormone therapy, and we're just getting this information in because this is so relatively new, but the people that go through this have more suicide rates. The rates of suicide increase, I should say. And the study that this dude cited was, but we have several studies that indicate that the suicide, the intentions and the thoughts are already there. There is no peer-reviewed study that indicates that there's an increase in the rates of suicide with individuals that express some sort of gender dysphoria versus those that actually go through these treatments. There's just none. And that's the only justification that you hear from the other side of this as to why they have to do it. We have to do it when they're 8. We have to do it when they're 9. We have to do it when they're 10. Why? Well, because they'll kill themselves if you don't. And oh, by the way, there's another piece to this. And I know that we're getting into the weeds here, but I think this is important. These same individuals that suggest that this person is truly gender dysphoric and that my boy is really a girl in mind and spirit, and that we want to make my boy a girl in physical appearance as well. And over the course of, well, if that is even true, doing this at the age of 10 or 11 or 12, I don't grant you this for 98% of the people that claim that they are transgender. I don't buy it. I understand that gender dysphoria exists. I understand that it exists in a very limited capacity. And I think we've way broadened the term to the point that it's difficult to understand who is who and what is what. Bottom line, even if I agreed with you that your child is truly gender dysphoric, if you want a successful outcome to a gender transition surgery, you have to let them go through puberty to do it. I mean, that gets rather graphic, but you don't develop the parts that are necessary in order to make the gender transition if you don't go through puberty to begin with. So you're not even accomplishing the task that you claim to want to accomplish. A lot of mental disorder going on. A lot. And I got that wrong, by the way. Completed suicides. The ACLU lawyer argued that the reason there's not evidence about completed suicides, not contemplated, completed suicides, is that it's a, quote, very small population of individuals with studies that don't necessarily have completed suicides within them. In other words, Strangio said, well, we don't have evidence to make a counter argument against what you're saying. Okay. 23 after the hour on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.